Hi there YouTube and welcome back to our World War I journey presented by Epic History TV. You voted the last time that you want this series and here we are. So if you're new to the channel, just hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you get notified when new videos come out, and you can also vote in future polls on series and channels that we are going to take on this channel. Today we're all, again having a romantic video, romantic night atmosphere, although it's a pretty depressing topic regarding the casualty numbers and everything that happened in the First World War. But the narrative on the First World War and the Second World War is definitely different, and the perspectives are definitely different in different countries. So let me know about, like interesting stuff that is told in your country, maybe some different things, different opinions, different information. I would really appreciate it in the comment section. Okay, let's just jump into the video. Doom, doom, doom.
World War I was supposed to have been a short and glorious war.
Yeah,
but by 1916,
like every other war,
a new kind of industrialized warfare had seen the death toll soar.
We're gonna be home by Christmas, right?
Or into the millions, with no end in sight. Naval blockades were beginning to cause shortages of food and fuel across Europe, while thousands of women had entered the workforce, replacing the men sent to fight in their millions. All sides were preparing for a long war.
Yeah, so this is the first war that started after a lot of the European countries industrialized, especially Germany and Great Britain and France, so the Western powers. Russia is still lagging behind. All the industry was put into this total war. So everything was centered around making ammunition for the war, everything, food for the soldiers, and everything was focused on war. And especially it's an interesting dynamic with women. So women were, like seen always as the traditional type thing. So stay-at-home moms. Well, now because of this mass mobilization, all the men are on the front. New men are always conscripted. So there is a shortage of labor in the industry. So women enter the workforce, and the interesting thing is, after World War I, when the troops came home and they started to re-employ in the industry, the societies tried to push women back into the household. During the First World War, it's always seen as a big emancipation moment for different women movements and women in general. So just a little side note, because they finally could earn money on their own and wouldn't be dependent on men and blah 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 blah. In that sense.
The war has raged for a year and a half as the Allies continue to battle the Central Powers, recently joined by Bulgaria. At sea, the British maintain their naval blockade of Germany, preventing the import of food and other vital raw materials.
Yeah, they're just starving out Germany.
Germany has retaliated with a U-boat blockade of Britain, but has to limit its attacks to avoid provoking the neutral USA, whose citizens have already been caught in the crossfire.
Yeah, Lusitania, the ship.
On the Western Front, French, British and Belgian troops are dug in opposite the Germans, both sides trapped in the bloody stalemate of trench warfare. On the Eastern Front, the Russians have ended their long retreat and stabilized the line, but their army has suffered huge losses. On the Italian front, Italian troops have launched a series of costly, unsuccessful attacks against strong Austro-Hungarian defences. While on the Balkan front, the Central Powers have overrun Serbia, whose army is forced to make a bitter retreat through the Albanian mountains.
Yeah. Serbia in the First World War is so interesting. The Battle of Cer, the Battle of Kolubara, so they're holding the Austro-Hungarians on the Sava River for a long, long time, but when Bulgaria outflanks them, it's virtually impossible for them to hold. So they escape through the Albanian mountains, they go to the island of Krf, then they embark on Greece, and then they, with the French and the British troops, form a new front where they try to re-enter Serbia and eventually Bulgaria, but it's also going to be more or less a stalemate right here.
Now, on the 5th of January, Austro-Hungarian troops attack Montenegro.
And it just fell.
They are delayed at the Battle of Mojkovac, but 3 weeks later, Montenegro is forced to surrender. On the Caucasus front, the Russians launch a surprise winter offensive against Ottoman Turkish forces. 6 weeks later, Russian troops occupy the city of Erzurum. In April, they capture the Black Sea port of Trebizond. Meanwhile, the British transport 2 motorboats to Lake Tanganyika in Africa. They finally arrive after a 10,000-mile trip by sea and land.
What?
And help the British seize control of the strategic lake.
That route is crazy.
From local German forces.
That's crazy.
The same month, in German Cameroon, German troops besieged on Mora Mountain for 18 months finally surrender to the Allies. It marks the end of the Cameroon campaign.
It's always interesting, I don't know about, probably the Brits and the French and the Germans learn more in their schools about what happened in Africa and outside of Europe, so the different territories where they fought against the other side. But for smaller countries, we just focus on the European battles. So I'm always curious what happened also in Africa and Asia and other continents, so it's always refreshing to hear something new.
On the Western Front, the Germans unleash a devastating assault on the French fortress town of Verdun.
That was
German General Erich von Falkenhayn knows France will defend this symbolic town to the last man. His plan, in his own words, is to bleed France white in its defense. It is the strategy of attrition. Verdun becomes one of the most terrifying battles of the war.
Definitely.
A mincing machine, where infantry divisions are destroyed almost as fast as they can be fed into the line. In Britain, 1 million men have already volunteered for military service. But the government realizes it won't be enough. Britain becomes the last major power to introduce conscription. That spring, on the Western Front,
the interesting thing, when guns in general were presented as a new way of having warfare prior to the First World War, but in general, it was way easier to teach somebody to just aim, point, and shoot, and reload, point, shoot, reload. That's also one of the reasons why we see so much casualties, because men were just so easily replaceable.
British troops are the last to be issued with steel helmets. The nature of trench warfare produces a high proportion of head wounds.
Yep.
The German Stahlhelm, the French Adrian helmet, and the British Mark I steel helmet offer limited protection from shell splinters and shrapnel. Neutral Portugal has been cooperating with the British, which seems to offer the best chance of holding on to her African colony, Portuguese Angola. On the 9th of March, Germany retaliates by declaring war on Portugal. On the Eastern Front, Russia launches
something that's not very much talked about, but I saw Indy Nadell cover it on his channel, is the effect of so much just devastating scenes and artillery fires. Of course, they could have, like physical damage, and that's why they needed to have helmets, because one of the ways to remove the enemy from their trenches was just to bombard them day and night with artillery, and then they would eventually maybe retreat. There's also one thing, shell shock, where a lot of people just it also caused physical damage, but also mental psychological damage to the troops. And he did a pretty amazing video. I'm gonna pin the video in the comment section below. After this video, you can go and check it out. It's pretty amazing, and especially how Germans, the Brits, and other nations tried to deal with it. Some of them at the beginning saw it as a way, you know, like, oh, the soldier is just trying to escape the front, but it's a real thing. It was a real thing.
There's an attack near Lake Narok to relieve pressure on the French at Verdun, but it's a disaster. There are 100,000 Russian casualties, and the attack fails to divert any German troops from the fighting at Verdun.
So inefficient.
In Dublin, Irish Republicans launch an armed revolt against British rule.
The Sinn Féin.
It becomes known as the Easter Rising,
Yeah.
and is put down after 6 days of street fighting.
Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin. There's still a political party in Ireland called Sinn Féin.
In the Middle East, after a 5-month siege, British forces at Kut surrender. General Townsend leads 9,000 British and Indian soldiers into captivity. About half later die from starvation or disease. Britain wants Arab support in its fight against the Ottoman Empire, so it's promised Arab leaders an independent Arab state after the war.
And they're also getting it.
But now, Britain and France secretly sign the Sykes-Picot Agreement, planning after the war to divide the Middle East into British and French zones of control.
Yeah,
Unaware of this,
we always talk about what the imperial powers did in Africa. The process of decolonization started, where Africa was just left as a mess, where all the ethnicities are mixed up in different states that cannot work with each other, the different ethnicities in one territory. But we always forget about the Middle East and what the Brits and the French did there. So also a lot of the territories that he's talking right now, which were prior part of the Ottoman Empire, it was also messed up. Syria, Lebanon, and all the Iraq and all the different states there.
this deal, Hussein bin Ali, Sharif of Mecca, leads the Arabs in revolt against Turkish Ottoman rule. In the Battle of Mecca, his forces seize control of the Holy City. On the Italian front,
And also the Arabs were a long part of the Ottoman Empire. And as the power of the Ottoman Empire declines, they started to even more and more use those lands to grab all the economy and valuable things, just send it to the, let's simplify it, to the Turkish part of the Ottoman Empire to improve parts there. So of course the different Arabs that were living in these parts, so in today's Iraq, Syria, they were expected to support the Brits and the French.
Austro-Hungarian
at that point
forces
of
launch
time.
a surprise attack at Asiago. Italian defences give way. Austro-Hungarian troops are poised to break through into northern Italy. That month in the North Sea, the German High Seas Fleet clashes with the British Grand Fleet at the Battle of Jutland. In the only major naval
Jutland.
battle of the war, the British suffer heavier losses, but claim victory as the German fleet withdraws and does not re-emerge from its base for the rest of the war.
We already talked about it. Germany was no match to Britain.
For the
in naval
summer of
force.
1916, the Allies have planned major simultaneous offensives against the Central Powers, from east and west. Now they are needed more than ever to relieve pressure on the French at Verdun and the Italians at Asiago. The Russians launch their attack first. On the Eastern Front, General Alexei Brusilov has carefully maintained the element of surprise. His troops break through the enemy lines, in some places advancing 60 miles and taking 200,000 prisoners. This brilliant, though costly, Russian attack achieves its aim as the Central Powers are forced to redeploy troops from other fronts to shore up the line.
This part is called Bukovina.
At sea, British cruiser HMS Hampshire, en route to Russia, hits a mine and sinks off Orkney. Among the 650 dead is Britain's iconic Secretary of State for War, Lord Kitchener.
What?
3
Really?
days later, in the Adriatic, Italian troopship Principe Umberto is sunk by a German submarine. It's the deadliest sinking of the war, with 1,900 lives lost.
Oh.
On the Western Front, Britain and France.
And something about, the only player in the seas for the Central Powers was actually Germany. So the Ottoman Empire, they had a few ships. Austro-Hungary also, they just had some ships, but not enough, and they were also concentrated more in the Adriatic Sea, so they wouldn't go much out in the Mediterranean, and especially not in the Pacific. So Germany was the only player for the Central Powers with their U-boats in the sea battle, but they were no match against the Brits.
Launched their major summer offensive, the Battle of the Somme. Hopes are high for a breakthrough, but the first day is a disaster. A long Allied artillery bombardment fails to knock out German defences, and waves of British infantry are cut down by machine gun fire as they advance into no man's land. In the space of a few hours, the British suffer 57,000 casualties, a third of them killed.
Oh my
It's the
God.
worst day in the history of the British Army. But more attacks are ordered, and the battle will rage for another 5 months.
I don't know about you, but I, as a European, always when I think or hear about the casualties in the First World War and the Second World War, especially those two wars. Of course, there were thousands of wars in Europe throughout history, but especially those two wars, I'm just like, man, I'm just getting goosebumps, and I'm just like, did we really need it? Did we really need those two wars? Did we really need that suffer? I'm sorry for the rant, but, you know, like, it's just like, nah.
Encouraged by
And also, regarding the big, okay, my rant is over. Regarding that big number of loss in human life and men, and just imagine how demoralized all the troops on all the fronts are, because you're attacking wave after wave, 1/3 of your regiment dies, and you gain, like, I don't know, 10 feet, 10 meters, 5 meters. You take one trench and you lose, I don't know, 10,000 men. It was pretty, like, devastating. And one of the things is all the socialist and the communist parties throughout Europe. So we need to take into account that not only was a communist and a socialist party relevant in Russia because of the Russian Revolution, but it was also, there were also a big underground communist and socialist parties in Germany, in Austro-Hungary, in France, in Britain, and they are getting more and more steam because one of their main slogans is "Workers of the World Unite," and all the men that are conscripted into the war are mostly workers from cities, and they're getting more and more steam, more and more support, more and more prestige, because one of their main ideas was end the war as fast as possible, because, like, workers, solidarity, workers are fighting against the workers. So they are through the First World War, they're getting more and more steam and more power in Europe, in virtually all the countries that are fighting.
the Russian advance, Romania joins the Allies. But despite an initially successful advance into Transylvania, Romania quickly faces a counter-offensive from German, Bulgarian and Austro-Hungarian forces.
They're getting overrun.
The Allied force at Salonika tries to support Romania by launching their own offensive towards Monastir, With Serbian troops in the lead, there are small gains, but dogged Bulgarian resistance prevents a breakthrough.
True.
On the Western Front,
interesting thing about Southeastern Europe is Romania, after the First World War, will be one of the countries that is going to gain most of the territory. So, as he pointed out, Transylvania, or Erdély, was part of Austro-Hungary, so the Hungarian part of the monarchy. They're going to gain that. There is also a big Romanian minority living there, so they're joining the war to get that territory, but they're also going to gain Bessarabia, which is today in Moldova, and they're also going to get parts of Bukovina, mainly the territories that Romania has today. So Romania will be one of the countries that's going to territorially gain one of the most percentage-wise, and actually Hungary is going to be on the losing side with, of course, Austria-Hungary, and they're going to lose, I think, 60% of their territory, but they are losing most of the territory after the First World War.
General von Falkenhayn finally calls off the attack at Verdun. The French army has honoured their commander, General Nivelle's promise.
No.
Ils ne passeront pas. They shall not pass.
They shall not pass.
But victory comes at a terrible price. 365,000 casualties. The Germans lose almost as many. Verdun remains one of the bloodiest battles in human history. For his defeat at Verdun, Falkenhayn is sacked, and Germany's heroes of the Eastern Front, von Hindenburg and Ludendorff, take command in the west. Meanwhile, the Battle of the Somme continues. Near the village of Flers, the British introduce a new weapon they hope can break the deadlock of the trenches.
Is it the tank? Is it the
tank?
It
is called the tank.
Yeah!
But despite some small successes, the first tanks are too few in number and too prone to mechanical failure to make any real impact.
Yeah, they're no...
On the eastern...
The early tanks, we already discussed it in a previous video, but as you can see, the early tanks are just, they are nothing like the tanks in the Second World War. They were a pretty easy target because they were so slow, but soldiers mainly would go in the back and be protected by the body of the tank against bullets.
To make any real impact. On the Eastern Front, Russia's Brusilov offensive comes to an end. Casualty estimates vary wildly, but it's clear both sides have suffered catastrophic losses. Neither the Russian nor the Austro-Hungarian army ever fully recovers.
2.4 million people in total. 2.4 million people.
On the Italian front, heavy fighting rages throughout the autumn, as Italian forces make repeated, costly assaults against Austro-Hungarian positions along the Isonzo River.
They are just on the Isonzo River, or the Socha River. It's just a defensive masterpiece of Svetozar Borojević, the Austro-Hungarian general. He is just holding that. The Italians cannot break through. That front is impossible to break.
The Battle of the Somme comes to an end amid autumn rain and mud. The Allies have advanced 10 miles at the cost of 600,000 casualties. German losses are about 450,000. The Allies reassure themselves that this is a winning strategy, because at this rate, Germany will run out of men first.
True.
Meanwhile, disaster engulfs Romania.
The Allies, the Entente, has just more men to spare. They can just throw men and material. They can just send men and materials in a more cost-deficient way. The Germans and the Austro-Hungarians need to take into account every man, every bullet, and everything.
As the country is overrun by the Central Powers, Romanian forces suffer 250,000 casualties. The remnants of its army take position alongside the Russians on the Eastern Front. That winter, Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria since
He's dying,
1848, dies. He is
Karl.
succeeded by his son, Karl. In Britain, Prime Minister Herbert Asquith is forced from office and succeeded by David Lloyd George, while General Joffre is replaced as French Commander-in-Chief by General Nivelle, who promises victory through bold, aggressive action. Amid the comings and goings, US President Woodrow Wilson's attempts to mediate a peace settlement come to nothing. Neither side is willing to make concessions. Epic History TV relies on the support of fellow history lovers. So if you like what we do, please consider pledging anything from $1 per video at the channel's Patreon page.
Full video. Just great videos. Yeah, we are now at a stalemate year, but Russia is going to go through a revolution, and the dynamics are going to shift even more. So all the eastern troops that Germany and Austria-Hungary have, they are going to switch to the west. But at this point in time, the Central Powers really don't have any real chance of winning the war. So at this point in time, it's just pointless. I mean, as I said, as a European, I think this war is pointless. And when I went through different European countries, I was in a lot of countries, in Germany, Austria, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, Bulgaria, Belgium, almost all the European countries. Every time when the topic of World War I comes, you always have those different perspectives. So let's say in Hungary, they always talk about how they lost much of their territory, and a lot of Hungarians are now living outside of Hungary. In Croatia, it's always about Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia. It's always about forming the first, let's just to oversimplify it, the first Yugoslavia with the Kingdom of Serbia. But it's always in a sense of, why did we need it? It's always in the same tone. So much suffering, so much casualties. Why did we need it? It's always the same narrative, especially in Belgium. When I was in Belgium, I cannot describe you the sentiment in Belgium towards the First World War. It's something that I never encountered before. But yeah, okay, hope that you enjoyed it. As I said, if you want to join, just hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and you're gonna get notified when new videos come out. I would like to hear your comments and opinions in the comment section below. Let me know. And yeah, until the next video, see ya.